A moving story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She took a vow of purity and left. He promised to wait for her. For 6 years. But when she returned, bringing with her secrets, guilt, and a love still burning, everything had already changed. What happens when time seeks to destroy what the heart has chosen to cherish? The March sun fell lazily on the cobblestones of Oakridge when Liam Fallon pushed open the door of the municipal library for the first time in 6 years. The smell of old paper and polished wood hit him like a physical memory, making him hesitate at the threshold. At 43, he carried on his shoulders the weight of someone who had learned to live with absence as a constant companion. His hair, now painted with silver strands at the temples, framed a face that time had sculpted with more depth, more gravity. But it was his eyes that revealed the true transformation, still brown, still intense, but inhabited by a serenity that hadn't existed before. The Conference on Contemporary American Literature had brought him back to Virginia after spending so much time wandering between New York and the countryside of Pennsylvania, where he had retreated to write. The woman that time kept had sold a modest 3,000 copies, but had found readers who understood every comma, every silence between the words. Letters arrived by mail, timid emails, casual encounters in bookstores where someone held the book against their chest and simply said, "I understood." It was enough, more than enough. On that Thursday afternoon, the library was almost empty. Only a few college students hunched over history books and an elderly woman dozing in an armchair by the window. Liam headed to the American literature section, looking for a specific edition of Emily Dickinson that he intended to quote in his lecture the following day. That's when he heard the voice. Deep, measured, reading aloud in a low voice, a passage he immediately recognized. It was by Mary Oliver. God once in a while takes away my poetry. I look at stone, see just stone. The voice came from the other side of the tall bookshelf, invisible but unmistakable like a fingerprint of the soul. Hannah. The book slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a dry noise that echoed through the silent room. For 6 years he had imagined this moment, had dreamed of it, feared it, prepared mental speeches that now dissolved like sugar in the rain. He rounded the bookshelf with steps that seemed not to touch the ground, and there she was, 25 years old now. The brown hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, looser than he remembered. The beige linen dress, simple but elegant, revealed a woman who had learned to inhabit her own body with a new grace, more conscious. She was sitting in a low armchair, legs crossed, an open notebook in her lap, where she was jotting down excerpts from her reading. When she raised her eyes and saw him, the whole world seemed to sigh. Liam. It wasn't a question. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition, as if a part of her had always known this moment would come. He approached slowly, like someone afraid of breaking a spell. Hannah. She closed the book. It was an anthology of contemporary poems, and stood up. They were the same height now. She had grown taller, or he had imperceptibly bent under the weight of the years. For a moment they just looked at each other, measuring the transformations that time had wrought in each of them. "You came back," he said, and the very obviousness of the statement made them smile. 3 months ago," she replied. "You look different, more old, serene." The word came out with a tenderness she couldn't disguise. Like someone who's found a kind of peace. Liam laughed softly, a sound without humor. "You give me too much credit. It's just well-managed exhaustion." She tilted her head, studying his face with the attention of someone who had always known how to read between the lines. "I read your book." His heart skipped a beat. And I recognized every page." Her eyes shone with an emotion that could have been tears or anger. "You had no right to make me so beautiful." The phrase hit him like a punch to the stomach. For 6 years he had wondered if she would approve, if she would feel exposed, if she would recognize the love he had distilled into every metaphor. Now he knew. "You need to know," he began, but she shook her head. "Not here." She looked around, noticing that the elderly woman had awakened and was watching them with poorly disguised curiosity. "Walk with me?" They left the library together, and Liam felt as if he were in a lucid dream, aware of every detail but unable to believe in the reality of the moment. The streets of Oakridge stretched before them, paved with irregular stones that told stories of centuries. They walked without a defined destination, just letting their feet choose the path. 6 years, Hannah said after a long silence. 6 years, he repeated. How was it? She stopped in front of a small church, painted white and blue, and rested her hand on the low wall surrounding it. Difficult, transformative, necessary. She looked at him. And you? How was waiting? The question carried layers that took him time to process. How was waiting? As if she knew he had waited, as if she had never doubted it. Like a fast, he finally said. You learn you can live without certain things, but you don't forget their taste. Hannah smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he had seen on her face since they'd reunited. You still talk like a poet. It's an incurable defect. It was one of the things that frightened me most about you, she confessed, the ease with which you transformed feelings into beautiful words. I never knew how to do that. You didn't need to. You lived them in a way that I could only observe and envy. They began walking again, now toward the central square. The afternoon was dying, and the first lights were beginning to come on in the colonial houses. It was a setting that seemed created for important conversations, for revelations that changed the course of things. I'm engaged, Hannah said suddenly without looking at him. Liam stopped walking. He felt the ground waver beneath his feet, but his voice came out strangely calm when he asked, For how long? 2 months. She finally faced him. But it's not what you're thinking. What am I thinking? That I found someone, that I fell in love, that I forgot. She shook her head. I didn't forget anything, Liam. Not a second of that weekend in Harper's Valley. Not a word you said, not the taste of your kiss. The confession completely disarmed him. For 6 years, he had become an expert in solitude, had learned to live with uncertainty, to nurture a hope he dared not name. But to hear that she had also kept every moment, that she had carried with her the same memories that alternately tormented and consoled him, was both relief and torture. Then why? Hannah sat on a bench in the square, and he joined her, maintaining a respectful distance that both knew was necessary. My father is sick, she began. Parkinson's, diagnosed a year ago. But he hides it from everyone, takes increasingly strong medications to be able to appear in public. He's going to run for Congress in the next elections, says it's the last term he needs to ensure that the church's entire social structure is secure when he's gone. And the engagement is part of that strategy. Nathan Vance, you must have heard of him. Liam knew the name. Young charismatic pastor, eloquent preacher, with a solid base of followers on social media. There were rumors of political ambitions, of a more modern theology that attracted young adults without alienating traditional conservatives. He's smart, Hannah continued, knows how to play the political game better than anyone I know, and knows how to use people. He's using you. We're using each other. The answer came out with a bitterness that surprised him. I need the protection that marriage to him would give me. He needs the legitimacy that comes from marrying Pastor Moore's daughter. Liam studied her profile silhouetted against the lights of the square. What kind of protection? Hannah took time to respond. When she did, her voice was low, laden with a weight he couldn't fully identify. Things happened during the mission years, things that Nathan knows and could use against me if I didn't cooperate. What things? She shook her head. I can't talk about that. Not yet. Silence settled between them, dense with unasked questions and answers that neither was ready to give. Liam felt an old anger beginning to boil in his chest, the same that had consumed him years ago, when he realized how Hannah's world was built on controls and conditioning that she herself couldn't fully question. You don't have to marry him, he said finally. Yes, I do. No, you don't. There are other ways to protect your father, other ways to... You don't understand. Hannah turned to him and there was a hardness in her eyes that hadn't existed before. You spent 6 years free, Liam. Writing, traveling, being whoever you wanted to be. I spent 6 years serving, obeying, carrying responsibilities I didn't choose, but that became mine. It's not as simple as you think. The reprimand silenced him. She was right, he had idealized the weight so much, romanticized the sacrifice so much, that he had forgotten that she had also been living, had also faced difficult choices, had also been shaped by circumstances beyond both their control. You're right, he admitted. I'm sorry. She softened her expression. No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have lashed out at you, it's just... She sighed deeply. It's hard being here, near you, feeling all of this again and knowing I can't do anything about it. Yes, you can. Liam, you can. Maybe not in the way we imagined before, but you can. He leaned slightly toward her without touching her, but creating an intimacy they both physically felt. Let me at least try to understand. Let me help. Hannah looked at him for a long moment, as if measuring risks, weighing consequences. The conference is tomorrow? Yes. After the conference, you're leaving. I was, but I can stay a few more days. Nathan arrives on Saturday. We're having lunch with my father and some church leaders to discuss the details of the wedding. She paused. Friday night I'll be alone. There's a country house that belonged to my aunt about 12 miles from here. She died last year and left it to me. Sometimes I go there when I need to think. Liam's heart raced. Are you inviting me? I'm giving you information. But her eyes said something else. If by chance you were driving on Madison Road Friday night and saw a blue house with a white porch and lights on, it would just be a coincidence. She rose from the bench and smoothed her dress. I need to go. I promised my mother I'd be home for dinner. Hannah. She stopped but didn't turn around. Your book of poems. You forgot it at the library. I didn't forget. She looked over her shoulder. I was reading Mary Oliver when you arrived. God, once in a while, takes away my poetry. I look at stone, see just stone. Do you know how that poem ends? Liam knew, but he shook his head. This is a very difficult phase, but I'll manage to get through it and God will give me back the eyes to see. That's what I'm trying to believe. She walked away across the square and Liam remained on the bench, watching her silhouette dissolve in the growing dusk. 6 years of waiting, of mental preparation, of constructing possible scenarios for this reunion, and nothing had been as he imagined. It was more complicated, more painful, more real. Hannah was no longer the 19-year-old girl he had kissed that weekend in Harper's Valley. She was a woman who carried secrets, who had made difficult choices, who was trapped in circumstances he still couldn't fully understand. But she was also, undeniably, the same person who had made his heart stop beating for 6 long years. The next morning, the conference passed in a blur of presentations and academic discussions that Liam attended like an actor playing his own role. He spoke about poetic language, about the intersection between literature and spirituality, about how writing can be a form of secular prayer. People applauded, asked intelligent questions, bought copies of his book for him to sign. A young literature student approached during the break. Professor Fallon, I read The Woman That Time Kept for my thesis on contemporary narratives. Is it autobiographical? All fiction is autobiographical, he answered, evading the question with the skill of someone who had learned to protect his privacy. And all autobiography is fiction. But does she really exist, the woman in the book? Liam looked out the auditorium window. Outside, Oak Ridge followed its eternal rhythm, tourists taking photos in front of Baroque churches, street vendors offering local crafts. It was Friday afternoon. In a few hours, he would be driving on Madison Road. She exists, he said simply, but not in the way I wrote her. The student seemed satisfied with the enigmatic response and walked away. Liam finished the customary greetings, packed up the books that remained unsold, said goodbye to the organizers, and walked to his car. It was a used Honda Civic he had bought the previous year, reliable and discreet, perfect for someone who had learned to value simplicity. He drove unhurriedly through the streets of Oak Ridge, memorizing every corner, every church, every detail he could carry with him afterward. He didn't know if he would return there anytime soon. He didn't know much, actually. Just that, in a few hours, he would be facing Hannah again, alone with her for the first time in 6 years, and that this could change everything or change nothing. Madison Road wound between hills covered with preserved forests. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in orange tones that reflected on the windshield. Liam drove at the speed limit, each mile bringing him closer to a moment he had imagined so many times that he had come to doubt if he really wanted it to happen. He saw the house before locating the number. It was exactly as Hannah had described, light blue with a white porch, situated on a small hill overlooking the valley. The lights were on. A car, a white Toyota, was parked in the side yard. Liam stopped the car by the roadside and turned off the engine. For a moment he just sat breathing, organizing his thoughts, preparing his heart for what was to come. He was no longer the 37-year-old man who had fallen in love with an impossible girl. He was a 43-year-old man who had learned that true love doesn't diminish with distance or time. It only transforms, deepens, becomes something both stronger and more fragile. He got out of the car and walked along the dirt road leading to the house. His footsteps echoed in the rural silence, accompanied only by the song of crickets and the distant sound of some stream. The porch door opened before he reached the yard. Hannah was there, silhouetted against the yellow light from the living room. She wore a long cotton skirt and a white long-sleeved blouse, simple and elegant. Her feet were bare. She looked like an apparition, a vision of everything he had lost and hoped to recover. "You came," she said, and there was real surprise in her voice, as if part of her hadn't believed he would actually come. "You doubted?" "I always doubt. It's a defect." He climbed the 3 steps to the porch and stopped in front of her. They were close enough that he could smell the subtle scent of her perfume, the same she wore 6 years ago. "Some things don't change." "Come in," she said. "I prepared dinner." The house was small but cozy, decorated with antique furniture and personal objects that told the story of a family. Black and white photographs on the walls, a shelf full of well-cared-for books, plants that someone watered with care. In the kitchen, the table was set for 2 people, with simple but beautiful plates and a half-empty bottle of wine. "You've already started drinking," Liam observed. "Liquid courage," she admitted, serving him a glass. "I'm not as brave as I used to be." "I think it's the opposite." They dined talking about neutral subjects, the house, the books on the shelf, the changes that had happened in Oakridge, but both knew they were just postponing the real conversation, the one that had brought them there. When they finished eating, Hannah collected the plates and Liam helped her, a domestic ritual that had a strange and familiar intimacy. "Let's go to the porch," she suggested when the kitchen was tidy. They sat in a double hammock that swayed gently with the night breeze. The valley stretched out before them, dotted with distant lights from farms and small towns. It was a scene of peace that contrasted with the tension they both felt. "Now you're going to tell me," said Liam, "about what Nathan knows, about what forces you to marry him." Hannah was silent for a long moment, swinging in the hammock and looking at the horizon. When she finally began to speak, her voice was low, laden with a guilt he immediately recognized. "It happened in the last year of the mission, in a community called High Ground in rural Mississippi, a place where modern medicine arrived once a month, if it arrived. Nathan was responsible for the administrative part of the mission. I took care of social assistance for women." She paused. There were 2 pregnant women with complications, one with eclampsia, the other with hemorrhage. They needed emergency C-sections. Liam felt a chill in his stomach. "Nathan said we didn't have the resources to provide transportation to Jackson, that it would be too expensive, that they needed to trust in God. I begged, said I knew people in the city who could help with the money. He refused." Her voice began to falter. "They died, both of them, and the babies too. My God." In the official report, Nathan wrote that we arrived too late, that they were already in terminal condition when we asked for help. He lied, and he asked me to confirm his version. Hannah turned to Liam, tears running down her face. "I confirmed it. I signed the report, out of fear, out of cowardice, out of not knowing what else to do. Hannah, there's more. Afterward, I discovered that Nathan had diverted part of the funds intended for medications to cover personal debts. If we had had the money, we could have saved those women, but I only found out months later, when it was already too late." Liam felt a cold anger spreading through his chest. "And he uses this against you. Says that if I break the engagement, he'll review all the reports I signed during the mission. He'll find inconsistencies, suggest that I was also involved in the misappropriation of funds." She wiped the tears with the back of her hand. "I would lose everything, my reputation, my family, my faith, and my father, in his condition, wouldn't survive the scandal. But do you have proof of what really happened?" "Some. Letters I wrote at the time to a friend, medical reports I managed to keep. But Nathan has more resources, more influence. He would transform anything I presented into evidence against me." Liam was silent, processing the information. The situation was more complex than he had imagined, darker. Nathan was not just a romantic rival. He was a predator who had used people's faith and vulnerability to build power and control. "That's why you came back," he said finally. "That's why I came back. To make a bargain. My freedom for my family's protection. It's not a fair bargain. There's no fair bargain when you have no choice. Liam rose from the hammock and walked to the porch railing. Below, the valley slept peacefully, oblivious to the human dramas unfolding in the illuminated houses. And if there were a way to expose Nathan without compromising you? There isn't. And if I helped you find one? Hannah approached him but kept her distance. Why would you do that? After so long, why would you risk yourself for me? He turned to face her. Do you really need to ask? Yes, I do, because we're not the same people from 6 years ago. Because I don't know if what you feel is love or nostalgia. Because I don't know anymore what I feel. The confession hit him like a slap. You don't know. I know that when I see you, my heart races. I know that when you speak, I remember everything I once dreamed for us. I know that being here alone with you seems both the most right and the most wrong thing in the world at the same time. She shook her head. But I also know that I'm a different woman now. That I carry guilt I didn't have before. That I've seen things that changed my way of understanding the world. I don't know if the Hannah you love still exists. She exists, said Liam without hesitation. She's here in front of me. Different, yes, more complex, more wounded, stronger, but it's her. Hannah looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to see through him, beyond him. How can you be so sure? Because I spent 6 years learning the difference between loving a person and loving a memory. Because I wrote an entire book trying to capture who you were, and discovered I couldn't. Because you were always greater than any word of mine. He took a step toward her. Because now, looking at you, I see everything you were and everything you've become, and I love you even more. The words hung between them, charged with an intensity that made the air seem denser. Hannah closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, there was a decision there that Liam recognized. If I kiss you now, she said softly, it won't be like before. It won't be innocent or simple or pure. I know. It will be complicated. It will hurt. It will change everything without resolving anything. I know. She came close until their bodies almost touched. And even knowing all that, you still want to? Since I saw you in the library, then kiss me, she whispered. Kiss me before I lose my courage. And he kissed her. The first contact was hesitant, as if both needed to remember how to do this. But soon the familiarity returned, along with a new hunger, more mature, that had grown during 6 years of absence. His hands found her face. His fingers lost themselves in her brown hair. She pressed herself against him, and Liam felt that he was finally home. When they separated, they were both trembling. That was a mistake, she said, but she didn't move away. It was, he agreed and kissed her again. The kiss lasted an eternity and a second at the same time. When they finally separated, Hannah was leaning against the porch railing, Liam's hands resting on either side of her body, creating a voluntary prison from which neither wanted to escape. Both were breathing erratically, and the night air seemed electrified by the intensity of the moment. 6 years, she whispered, touching her lips with her fingertips, as if wanting to preserve the sensation. 6 years imagining how it would be, and still what? Still I wasn't prepared. She looked him in the eyes, and Liam saw there a vulnerability she rarely allowed others to see. To feel all this again, to want so much. He brushed a strand of hair from her face with a delicacy that contrasted with the intensity of the previous moment. Hannah, I need you to know that I didn't come here tonight expecting this to happen. I came because you asked for help, because I want to understand, because you love me. It wasn't a question. Because I love you. But that doesn't mean I'm going to pressure you to make choices you're not ready to make. She laughed softly, a sound without humor. You were always like that. Too kind for your own good. And you were always too brave for yours. Brave? Hannah shook her head. A brave woman wouldn't have signed that false report. A brave woman wouldn't be here, engaged to a man she despises, being blackmailed for her own cowardice. A brave woman did what she could in an impossible situation. A brave woman spent 6 years serving in conditions that most people wouldn't endure for even 6 weeks. A brave woman is here now, telling me the truth, even knowing the risk it represents. Hannah studied his face in the dim light of the porch, illuminated only by the light coming from the living room. How do you do that? What? Make me feel like I'm worth more than I really am. I don't make you feel anything. I just see what was already there. Liam took her hands in his. Hannah, let me help. Really. Not as a knight in shining armor trying to save the damsel in distress, but as someone who loves you, and who perhaps, just perhaps, can see a way out that you're not able to see. She interlaced her fingers with his. How? First, tell me everything. Every detail you remember about what happened in High Ground. Every conversation with Nathan, every document you signed, every person who might have witnessed something. And then? Then we'll discover a way to expose him without you being harmed. There must be other people who know the truth, other victims of his manipulation. Hannah hesitated. Liam, you don't know Nathan like I do. He's intelligent, calculating. He has connections in all the right places. If we try something and fail, if we don't try anything, you'll spend the rest of your life tied to a man who uses your guilt against you. And worse, he'll continue doing this to other people. Liam gently squeezed her hands. How many other women has he already manipulated? How many other deaths might he have on his hands? The question hit Hannah like a punch to the stomach. She had never thought of it that way, never considered that her situation might not be unique. The idea that other people might be suffering the same kind of blackmail, that other lives might be at risk because of her silence, completely changed the nature of the dilemma. You're right, she said finally. God, you're right. Then help me help you. Hannah released his hands and walked to the hammock, sitting on the edge. Liam followed her, positioning himself in front of her, patiently waiting for her to organize her thoughts. High Ground is about 4 hours by car from Jackson, she began, her voice taking on a narrative quality that showed how she had revisited this story many times in her mind. It's a community of about 300 people, mostly rural folks who live off farming and subsistence agriculture. The church mission there has existed for more than 15 years, but it was always poorly managed. When Nathan was assigned to reorganize the activities, everyone believed things would improve. When did this happen? 2 years ago. I had already been there for 4 years when he arrived. She paused, looking at the dark valley. At first, he really did improve many things. Organized medical supplies, created a more efficient schedule for volunteer doctors' visits, even secured a partnership with a non-profit from New York to bring new equipment. But afterward, he began cutting costs, said we needed to be more efficient, that we were wasting resources on cases that didn't have a guaranteed solution. Hannah's voice became harder. He began classifying people between those who were worth the investment and those who were unnecessary costs. Liam felt a chill down his spine. What do you mean? Elderly people with chronic diseases, children with severe disabilities, women with high-risk pregnancies. Nathan created criteria to decide who deserved more expensive medical help and who should trust in God. On paper, it seemed like a matter of responsible resource management. In practice, it was a death sentence. And you opposed this? I tried, several times, but Nathan always had solid arguments, always made me feel like I was being too emotional, too irrational. Said I didn't understand the complexities of administration, that my kind heart was preventing me from seeing the bigger picture. Hannah laughed bitterly. He was very good at making people feel guilty for disagreeing with him. And the 2 pregnant women? Jane and Mary. Jane was 17, pregnant with her first child. Mary was 23 and had already lost 2 babies in previous births. Hannah closed her eyes, as if the images were coming back with full force. Both began showing complications in the same week. Jane had sudden convulsions, clear signs of eclampsia. Mary began bleeding much more than normal. And you had a way to provide medical help? We did. Dr. Carter, a volunteer obstetrician from Jackson, had made it clear that any emergency should be communicated to him immediately. He had even given a satellite phone for contact in urgent cases. Hannah's voice began to falter again. But Nathan refused to call, said the cost of helicopter removal would be too high, that we needed to be absolutely certain it was necessary before wasting resources. How much would it have cost? $5,000, each removal. Hannah looked at Liam with eyes full of tears. $5,000, Liam. The same amount that Nathan had spent the previous month buying a new generator for the house where he stayed. The information left Liam speechless for a moment. The coldness, the calculation behind the decision, was more shocking than he had imagined. And you tried to intervene? I tried everything. I offered my own money, which I had saved during the mission years. I proposed taking up a collection among the missionaries. I even suggested selling some of the handicrafts that the community made for tourists. She wiped away the tears. Nathan rejected everything, said it would be a dangerous precedent, that we couldn't spoil the community by making them believe there would always be expensive solutions for all problems. How long did you wait? 3 days. 3 days watching those women deteriorate, while Nathan insisted it was a matter of faith and Christian resignation. Hannah's voice was laden with an old anger that she rarely allowed to surface. On the 3rd day, Jane went into a coma. Mary had lost so much blood she could barely stay conscious. That's when I said I was going to call Doctor Carter, even without authorization. And he stopped you, physically. He locked the satellite phone in his office and said that if I tried anything on my own, I would be sent back to the United States and face a disciplinary process from the church that would end my missionary career forever. Hannah shook her head. I should have done it anyway. I should have found a way. I should have... Hannah, stop. Liam knelt in front of her, holding her face between his hands. You were in an impossible position. He used your dedication to the mission against you, manipulated your faith to control you. But I could have saved them. He could have saved them. The responsibility was his, not yours. Hannah took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. They died in the early morning of the 4th day. First Jane, then Mary, a few hours later. The babies had no chance at all. And what did Nathan do afterward? Organized a beautiful funeral, gave an emotional speech about how God sometimes calls his angels back home, how true faith means accepting the divine mysteries. The irony in Hannah's voice was cutting. And then he called me into his office and said we needed to align our version of what happened. That's when he asked you to lie in the report. Said it would be better for everyone if we said we arrived too late, that the complications were sudden and inevitable, that there was nothing we could have done. Hannah rose from the hammock and began pacing the porch, as if she couldn't stay still. And I agreed. I signed the papers, confirmed his version when other missionaries asked, lied to the victims' families. Why did you agree? Because I was exhausted, because I felt guilty. Because Nathan convinced me that revealing the truth would only cause more suffering for everyone. She stopped pacing and looked at Liam. And because I was a coward. Pure and simple cowardice. It wasn't cowardice. It was psychological manipulation. Nathan knew exactly how to control you, what buttons to push to make you feel responsible for choices that weren't yours. Hannah sat back down in the hammock, beside him this time. Afterward, I started noticing other strange things. Medications that should last a month ran out in 2 weeks. Money designated for construction materials disappeared. Supplies that were donated never reached the community. Did you document any of this? Some things, I have copies of supply lists that didn't match what we actually received, emails to suppliers that were never answered, invoices that didn't match the products delivered. She looked at him, but nothing very concrete. Nathan always had plausible explanations, always managed to justify the discrepancies. Where are these documents now? At home, kept in a folder that my mother thinks are just mission souvenirs. Liam felt a spark of hope. Hannah, these documents could be the key to everything. If we can prove that Nathan was misappropriating resources, we can build a case against him that doesn't depend on your testimony about the deaths. What do you mean? If he was stealing money intended for the mission, that's a crime. Embezzlement, at the very least. And if we can prove that people died as a direct consequence of these diversions, Liam paused, organizing his thoughts. That would completely change the dynamic. He would go from being the accuser to becoming the accused. Hannah looked at him with an expression that mixed hope and skepticism. But how to prove all this? They're just some loose documents, nothing that really proves bad faith. Because you're thinking small. Nathan didn't start stealing yesterday, and High Ground was probably not the first community where he did this. Liam stood up, walking across the porch as he spoke, the rhythm of his steps accelerating as the ideas formed. If we can track his history, other missions where he worked, other suspicious situation, that would take months. And Nathan arrives tomorrow. The wedding is scheduled for 3 months from now. Then we'll have to work quickly. He stopped in front of her. Do you trust me? The question hung in the night air. Hannah studied him for a long moment, as if measuring not just the trust she felt for him, but also the courage she had to bet everything on an uncertain possibility. Yes, she said finally. I trust you. Then give me 2 days, just 2 days before Nathan arrives. Let me see what I can discover. What are you going to do? I'm going to do what I know how to do best. Research, investigate, ask questions. I'm going to use my contacts in journalism, people who know how to track down information. Liam sat beside her again. And you're going to help me. I need everything you have on Nathan. Dates, places, names of people who worked with him, any detail that might be relevant. Hannah nodded, but there was a concern in her eyes that he recognized. And if we don't find anything? If we can't prove anything in time? Then we go back to the original plan. You marry him, protect your family, and we'll think of other ways to deal with the situation afterward. But you'll leave. The statement fell like a stone between them. It was true, and they both knew it. If she married Nathan, Liam couldn't stay. It would be impossible for everyone involved. I will, he admitted, but that doesn't mean I'll give up on you. It just means I'll wait as long as necessary. Another 6 years. 60 if necessary. Hannah laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. You can't promise that. Yes, I can, because I've already proven to myself that I can. Liam touched her face gently. Hannah, in the last 6 years I dated. Years. I tried to relate to other people, tried to convince my heart it was time to move on. And I discovered that's not how love works. At least not the kind of love I feel for you. It's not something you choose to feel or not feel. It's something that simply exists, like the color of your eyes or the sound of your laughter. She closed her eyes, as if the words were physically painful. Okay, it's not fair to ask this of you. You're not asking, I'm offering. He kissed her forehead with a tenderness that made her shiver. But first, let's try plan A. Let's try to find a way to free you from this. Hannah opened her eyes and looked at him with an intensity that disarmed him. And if we succeed? If we really manage to expose Nathan and break this blackmail? What do you mean? I mean that I would be free. Really free. She came closer to him, their faces inches apart. Free to choose my own life. Free to choose who I want to be with. Liam's heart accelerated. And would you choose? Instead of answering, she kissed him. But this time it was different. There was no hesitation, no guilt. It was a kiss from someone who was making a decision, making a promise. When they separated, both were breathless. That's my answer, she whispered. The rest of the night passed like a waking dream. They talked until the early hours of the morning, Hannah telling every detail she could remember about Nathan, about the mission, about the people who had witnessed suspicious situations. Liam made notes in a notebook he always carried, creating connections, identifying patterns. When the sun began to rise, painting the sky in rosy tones, both knew they had a battle ahead that could change everything or completely destroy them. I need to go, said Hannah, looking at the clock. My mother wakes up early, and if she notices I didn't sleep at home, I'll take you. No. It's better if we return separately. She rose from the hammock where they had spent the last hours talking and planning. Nathan arrives this afternoon. He'll want to see me immediately. Can you pretend everything is normal? I've been pretending for the last few months. A few more days won't make a difference. But there was a new determination in her voice, a strength that wasn't there before. Liam stood up too, taking her hands in his. Hannah, I need you to promise me something. What? If Nathan suspects anything, if he makes any more direct threat, you call me immediately. Don't try to solve it alone. Don't try to protect anyone. Call me. She nodded. I promise. And one more thing. No matter what happens in the next few days, don't forget what you told me tonight, about being free to choose. How could I forget? They kissed one more time, a goodbye kiss that carried the weight of all the uncertainties that were to come. Then Hannah gathered her things, got into the white Toyota, and drove down the dirt road toward the main road. Liam stayed on the porch watching until the car's taillights completely disappeared. Then he went back inside the house, picked up his cell phone, and called the first name on the list of contacts who could help him. Marina, it's Liam Fallon. I know it's 6 in the morning, but I need a favor. A big favor. Marina Sanders had been his editor in New York years ago, before becoming a freelance investigative journalist. She was one of the most insightful and determined people he knew, and she had contacts in all the places where important information tended to be hidden. Liam, my God, how long has it been? Are you okay? Did something happen? I'm fine, but yes, something happened. I need to investigate a person, and I need to do it quickly. Do you still have those contacts in the district attorney's office? In the IRS? I do. What kind of investigation? Misappropriation of funds from religious organizations, possible fraud, embezzlement, negligence that resulted in deaths. Liam paused. And Marina? This is personal. Very personal. I understand. Her voice became more serious. Send me everything you have by email. Names, dates, places. I'll start making some calls. Thank you. Liam, are you really okay? Your voice sounds strange. He looked out the kitchen window, where the valley was beginning to wake with the first rays of sun. In a few hours, Nathan Vance would be in Oak Ridge. In a few hours, Hannah would have to go back to playing the role of the obedient and passionate fiancé. In a few hours, the race against time that would determine the future of both would officially begin. I don't know, he said honestly, but I need to be. All right. Give me 2 hours to start tracking information, and then we'll talk again. After he hung up, Liam took a quick shower, prepared a strong coffee, and settled into the small office of the house with his laptop and the notes from the previous night. He had work to do and time was running out. The first thing he did was research everything he could find about Nathan Vance on the internet. There was a lot of material, photos at religious events, preaching videos, articles in local newspapers about social projects. The man who emerged from this public portrait was charismatic, eloquent, apparently dedicated to the well-being of the communities where he worked. But Liam had learned, during his years as a professor and writer, that public narratives rarely told the complete story. He began to look between the lines, at the details that went unnoticed to those who weren't specifically looking for contradictions. The first thing that caught his attention was the frequency with which Nathan changed positions. In 8 years of missionary career, he had worked in 6 different communities, never remaining more than 2 years in the same place. For a job that normally required long-term commitments, it was a suspicious turnover. The second thing was the pattern of the projects he led. They always involved substantial amounts of money, always had partnerships with external organizations that facilitated the flow of resources, and always ended with results that fell short of initial expectations. Liam began to make a list of the communities where Nathan had worked, noting dates, types of projects, and any information he could find about results or controversies. It was 9:30 in the morning when Marina called back. Liam, you've stepped into a hornet's nest. This Nathan Vance has more red flags than a Chinese military parade. What did you discover? For starters, there are at least 3 complaints filed against organizations where he worked, all for administrative irregularities, all archived due to insufficient evidence. Marina paused. But between us, when there's smoke in 3 different places, it's because there's fire somewhere. Exactly. And there's more. I got the name of an ex-employee of an NGO in Memphis where he worked 3 years ago. She was fired after questioning some expenses, and from what my contact told me, she didn't leave satisfied. Can you get her contact? I already have it. Anna Paula Fletcher. She now works at a consulting firm in Nashville, but she agreed to talk to you this afternoon if you call her. Liam felt the first real spark of hope since they had begun the investigation. Marina, you're an angel. I'm not finished yet. My contact at the IRS said it's worth taking a look at his income tax returns from the last few years. Apparently, there are some discrepancies between the declared income and the standard of living. What kind of discrepancies? New cars, international trips, real estate investments, nothing illegal in itself, but difficult to justify with the official salary of a missionary. Liam made more notes, feeling that the pieces of a complex puzzle were beginning to fit together. Do you think we have something solid? Alone, no. But if this Anna Paula confirms suspicions about Memphis, and if you get more information about other communities where he worked, Marina made a significant pause. We might have the beginning of a pattern that's worth investigating more deeply. And how long would that take? For a complete investigation? Months. But to gather enough information to force an official investigation? Maybe weeks. Weeks. Liam looked at the notes spread on the table. Hannah had said she had 3 months until the wedding, but Nathan would arrive that afternoon. Each day that passed would be more difficult for her to maintain the facade, more dangerous if he suspected anything. Marina, I need to accelerate this. A lot. Why the rush? Liam hesitated. Telling the whole truth would mean exposing Hannah, putting her story in the hands of someone he trusted, but who didn't have the same emotional investment in the situation. Because there's a person being blackmailed by this man right now. And the more time he has to consolidate his position, the harder it will be to protect her. I see. Marina was silent for a moment. All right, I'll make some extra calls, see if I can speed up the process. But Liam, you need to be aware that if we're dealing with someone really dangerous, messing with him could be risky. I know. But the risk of doing nothing is greater. After he hung up, Liam immediately called Anna Paula Fletcher. She answered on the third ring, and her voice sounded cautious when he identified himself. Marina Sanders said you'd like to talk about Nathan Vance, he said. May I ask if you mind sharing your experience with him? It depends. Why do you want to know? Liam chose his words carefully. Because there's evidence that he may be repeating in other places the same pattern of behavior that you witnessed in Memphis. Anna Paula was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened. How much time do you have? As much time as you need. Then get ready. Because what I have to tell you about Nathan Vance will make you lose sleep for a few nights. And during the following hour, as Anna Paula told her story, a narrative of psychological manipulation, misappropriation of resources, and intimidation of those who tried to report irregularities, Liam felt his worst suspicions being confirmed. Nathan wasn't just an opportunistic or unethical man. He was a systematic predator who used religious organizations as a facade for personal enrichment and control over vulnerable people. He was exactly the type of man who wouldn't hesitate to destroy Hannah if she represented a threat to him. When he hung up the phone, Liam looked at the clock. It was 12:15. Nathan had probably already arrived in Oak Ridge. In a few hours he would be dining with Hannah and her family, playing the role of the perfect son-in-law, the dedicated future husband. Liam picked up the car keys. He had more investigation to do, more people to talk to. But first, he needed to see Hannah. He needed to look into her eyes and make sure she was safe, at least for now. Because after the conversations of that morning, one thing had become absolutely clear. They weren't just fighting for the right to be together. They were fighting against someone who wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who stood in his way. And time was running out. Nathan Vance arrived in Oak Ridge in a silver BMW that gleamed under the afternoon sun, the kind of car that cost more than most families in town made in 3 years. Hannah watched him from the window of her parents' room, where she had spent the last 2 hours helping her mother prepare the special lunch that would serve as a welcome for her future son-in-law. Her hands trembled imperceptibly when he got out of the car, impeccable in a navy blue suit that had cost a fortune. His hair perfectly cut, his rehearsed smile already in place. 28 years old, 6 feet tall, Nathan possessed the kind of masculine beauty that attracted glances in the streets and made mothers sigh thinking of future daughters-in-law. But Hannah knew the man behind the facade. She knew how those blue eyes could become cold as ice when he didn't get what he wanted. She knew how that melodious voice, which preached about love and compassion from pulpits, could become as cutting as a razor when spoken in private. "Hannah, dear, your fiancé has arrived," her mother's animated voice echoed up the stairs. "Come down to greet him." She took a deep breath, checked her appearance in the hallway mirror, and descended the stairs with the smile she had practiced for 3 months. Nathan was in the living room, effusively embracing her father, who was trying to disguise the slight tremor in his hands caused by the medication for Parkinson's. "Pastor Moore, you look great, rested, renewed. God has been good to you." Nathan spoke with that particular cadence he reserved for public occasions, each word measured and placed in the exact spot to cause maximum impact. "Nathan, my son, how was the trip?" Hannah's father smiled with genuine joy. He really liked Nathan, saw in him the ideal successor to continue the work he had begun decades ago. Peaceful, thank God. The road was good, traffic flowing. Nathan turned when he noticed Hannah on the stairs, and his eyes traveled from her head to her feet in an assessment that disguised itself as admiration. "And there's my princess. More beautiful every day." He approached and kissed her on the cheek, his hands resting possessively on her waist for a moment that lasted too long. Hannah felt her stomach contract but maintained the smile. "Glad you arrived well," she said, trying to sound natural. "I was anxious to see you." "Me too, my love, me too." His eyes lingered on her face, as if looking for something specific. "You seem different, more radiant. The country air is doing you good." There was something in the way he said this that sent a chill up Hannah's spine. It was as if he were testing, probing, looking for changes that might indicate something out of the ordinary. "Must be the tranquility of being home," she replied, "and the anticipation of our wedding." Nathan smiled, but his eyes remained alert. "Of course, our blessed union." Lunch proceeded in an atmosphere of forced celebration. Hannah's mother had prepared all of Nathan's favorite dishes, which he praised with exaggerated enthusiasm. Hannah's father spoke about the preparations for the political campaign, about how Nathan's support would be crucial for the coming years. Nathan, in turn, discoursed about his plans to expand the church's reach, about strategic partnerships he was developing, about the importance of having a wife committed to the ministerial vision. "Hannah has always been special in that regard," he said, delicately cutting a piece of steak. "Dedicated, obedient, willing to sacrifice herself for the greater good. During the mission years, she demonstrated admirable spiritual maturity." Hannah almost choked on her water. The way he talked about sacrifice and obedience sounded like code for something much more sinister. "It's true," her father agreed, looking at her with pride. "Always told me our Hannah was born to serve God through ministry." "And she will continue to serve," added Nathan, his eyes meeting Hannah's. "Won't you, dear? Continue being the dedicated and silent wife you've always been." The word silent fell like a stone into the conversation. Officially, it was just a compliment to her discretion. But Hannah understood the real message. Keep quiet about what you know. Continue being the good girl who doesn't ask inconvenient questions. "Of course," she murmured. "Always." After lunch, Nathan suggested they take a walk through the historic center to talk privately about the wedding preparations. Hannah's parents thought the idea was romantic and dismissed them with approving smiles. They walked in silence along the stone streets, Nathan cordially nodding to acquaintances who crossed their path. It was only when they were completely alone that he finally spoke. "You're strange," he said without preamble, stopping in front of a small church where there were no passers-by nearby. "What do you mean, strange?" "Different. There's something about you that wasn't there when I left for New York last week." He turned to face her completely. "Something has changed." Hannah forced a confused expression. "I don't know what you're talking about, Nathan. I'm the same." "You're not. Your eyes are different. There's how can I say, a new energy, as if something had awakened you." He took a step closer. "The question is, what was it?" Hannah's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it, but years of life in a conservative religious family had taught her to lie with conviction when necessary. "The only thing that changed was that I'm more excited about our wedding," she said, forcing a smile. "Maybe that's what you're perceiving." Nathan studied her face for a long moment. "Maybe," he said finally, but his voice made it clear he wasn't completely convinced. "Or maybe you met someone interesting during these days alone." The accusation was made in a casual tone, almost playful, but Hannah recognized the threat behind the words. "Don't be ridiculous," she replied, managing to sound slightly offended. "What kind of person do you think I am?" "I know exactly what kind of person you are, Hannah. That's why we're getting married." He smiled, but there was no warmth at all in the expression. "You're loyal, reliable, and above all, smart enough to understand when you have a good thing and not do anything that might ruin it." "Of course." "Good." Nathan took her arm, and they began walking again. "Because it would be very sad if someone did something foolish that forced certain revelations to come to light, especially with your father in the delicate situation he's in." The threat was clear now. Hannah nodded, trying to appear submissive while inside a cold anger began to boil. How had she been so naive as to let herself be trapped by this man? How had she allowed her guilt and fear to be transformed into shackles? They spent the rest of the afternoon visiting tourist spots, Nathan taking selfies that he would post on social media to maintain the image of the happy couple. He was a consummate actor, alternating between public charm and subtle intimidation whenever they were alone. Hannah found herself perversely admiring the skill with which he manipulated each situation. When they returned home in the late afternoon, Nathan announced that he needed to make some important calls and locked himself in the office that Hannah's father had offered for his use. Hannah took the opportunity to go up to her room and check if there were messages from Liam. There was one sent 2 hours before. "Discovered important things, need to talk to you urgently, but be careful." She quickly typed, "He arrived. He's suspicious of something. I can't leave today." The response came almost immediately. Understood. Tomorrow morning at the library, 9 a.m. Pretend you're researching things for the wedding. Hannah deleted the messages and put the phone deep in the drawer of the dresser. Under intimate clothing she knew Nathan wouldn't touch, at least not yet. From downstairs came voices. Nathan had finished his calls and was animatedly conversing with her parents about the political campaign. She went down to join the conversation, once again playing the role of the attentive and interested fiancé. "We were talking about next week's agenda," her father explained, when she sat next to Nathan on the sofa. "We have 3 important events where you two will need to appear together." "What kind of events?" asked Hannah. "A conference on the Christian family at First Baptist Church," listed Nathan, "a charity lunch at the Rotary Club, and a debate on public policies for youth at City Hall. Each event would represent more hours of pretending, more fake photos, more steps toward a wedding that she now knew she needed to prevent at any cost." "Of course," she said. "I'll be ready. And there's something I wanted to discuss with you," continued Nathan, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "About the wedding ceremony. I've been thinking it would be interesting to have a larger event than originally planned." Hannah's father frowned. "Larger how?" "More guests, more media, more visibility. It would be an excellent opportunity to strengthen our base of support before the elections." Nathan leaned forward, entering the persuasion mode that Hannah knew well. "Imagine the headlines. Traditional Christian family unites in blessed matrimony." It would be the kind of image that would resonate with our target electorate. Hannah felt her stomach contract. A larger wedding with more visibility would be infinitely more difficult to cancel or postpone. Nathan was moving the pieces on the board, creating additional pressures that would make any escape attempt more costly. "It's an interesting idea," said her father, clearly considering the political implications. "More than interesting," insisted Nathan. "Essential. We're building something bigger than just a personal union. We're creating a symbol." A symbol. That was exactly how Nathan saw the wedding, not as the union between 2 people who loved each other, but as a tool for political and spiritual marketing. "We need to talk about the costs," said Hannah's mother, always practical. "Don't worry about that," Nathan smiled. "I know people who would be honored to sponsor an event like this. Christian businessmen who understand the value of investing in solid spiritual leadership." Another piece of the puzzle. Nathan had access to substantial amounts of money, supposedly from Christian businessmen who wanted to support his cause. Hannah wondered how many of these supposed sponsors really existed, and how much money that should be used for charitable purposes was actually financing Nathan's luxurious lifestyle. The conversation continued for another hour, with Nathan gradually taking control of all aspects of the wedding planning. Each decision was presented as a suggestion, but it was clear that disagreeing wasn't really an option. It was a subtle but effective demonstration of power. When they finally retired for the night, Hannah was exhausted from the effort of maintaining the facade. Nathan slept in the guest room. He was too traditional to suggest any impropriety before the wedding, but not before giving Hannah a goodnight kiss that lasted too long and had a taste of possession. "Sleep well, my princess," he whispered, his hands caressing her arms in a way that might seem tender to any observer, but that Hannah felt as a reminder that she belonged to him. "Tomorrow we have a lot to do." Hannah lay in bed unable to sleep, looking at the ceiling and trying to process everything that had happened that day. Nathan was more controlling than ever, more possessive, more willing to accelerate the wedding plans. It was as if some predatory instinct had detected a threat, and he was reacting by rapidly consolidating his position. Meanwhile, about 3 miles away, Liam was sitting in the small office of the country house, surrounded by papers, notes, and 2 empty coffee cups. He had spent the entire day on the phone, talking to people in 3 different states, putting together pieces of a puzzle that was becoming darker with each new piece of information. The conversation with Ana Paula had been just the beginning. Marina had gotten the contact of 2 other people who had worked with Nathan in previous projects, and both had similar stories to tell. Always the same pattern: resources that disappeared, vulnerable people being manipulated, anyone who questioned the methods being intimidated or removed. But the most shocking discovery had come from an unexpected source: Dr. Robert Carter, the volunteer doctor who provided services in High Ground, had agreed to talk after Marina explained the situation. And what he had told had left Liam with a cold anger that still pulsed in his veins hours later. "I remember those cases perfectly," Dr. Carter had said, his voice laden with a contained professional emotion. "Jane Smith and Mary Johnson, two young women who died completely unnecessarily. Were you contacted about their cases?" "Never. And that was what intrigued me most at the time. I had left very clear instructions that any obstetric emergency should be communicated immediately. I had even given a satellite phone specifically for this type of situation." Liam had felt his heart accelerate. "And why weren't you called?" "That's the question. Weeks later, when I learned of the deaths through other channels, I tried to understand what had happened. According to the official report, the complications were sudden and inevitable. But when I talked informally with some people from the community, what did they say? That the two women had been sick for days. That they had begged for medical help. That someone from the mission had refused to ask for external help." Dr. Carter had made a long pause. "Young man, I've been working with medicine in underserved communities for 25 years. I've seen many tragedies that could have been avoided, but rarely have I seen something so deliberate." "Deliberate? Letting people die when you have the means to save them isn't negligence, it's choice." The doctor's words still echoed in Liam's mind as he organized all the information he had collected. He now had 3 reliable witnesses willing to talk about irregularities in projects led by Nathan. He had documentary evidence of at least 4 situations where resources had been poorly managed. And he had the testimony of a respected doctor about the deaths that had been used to blackmail Hannah. But it still wasn't enough. Nothing he had in hand would definitely prove that Nathan was guilty of serious crimes. Everything could be explained as poor administration, bad luck, questionable but not necessarily criminal decisions. He needed something more, something incontestable. That's when his phone rang. It was Marina, calling almost at 11 at night. "Liam, I found something you need to know immediately." "What?" "Remember I said I was going to check his income tax returns?" Marina spoke quickly, with the excitement of someone who had discovered something important. "I got unofficial access to some information, and there's something very strange." "Go on." "Nathan declared an income of $42,000 last year. Missionary salary plus some sparse lectures." Marina made a dramatic pause. "But in the same year he bought a $300,000 apartment in Atlanta and a $120,000 car. In cash. Both." Liam felt a discharge of adrenaline. "That's completely impossible with the declared income. And there's more. I managed to track suspicious bank movements. Regular transfers of substantial amounts from accounts linked to religious organizations to his personal accounts." "How much?" "In the last 3 years, more than $500,000. Liam was silent for a moment, processing the information. $500,000 diverted from organizations that supposedly existed to help those most in need. How many lives could have been saved with that money? How many deaths could have been avoided? Marina, is this evidence enough for a formal complaint?" "More than enough. With what we have now, we can take this to the district attorney and force an official investigation. Embezzlement, tax evasion, fraud. Here it's going to be a huge scandal. How long would it take? To initiate the investigation? A few days, a week at most. For it to become public? Maybe 2 weeks. Liam looked at the calendar on the wall. 2 weeks would still be before Hannah's wedding. If he could accelerate the process, if he could get the investigation to become public in time. "Marina, I need you to make this happen as quickly as possible. It's a matter of life and death." "Life or death? Nathan is blackmailing someone to force a marriage. If we can't expose him before the ceremony, it may be too late." Marina was silent for a moment. "Liam, are you romantically involved with this person being blackmailed?" The question caught him off guard. "Why are you asking that?" "Because I need to know if you're thinking clearly or if you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. What we're doing here is serious. If we make accusations that we can't completely prove, we could be the ones sued for defamation." Liam took a deep breath. Marina was right to be cautious. She had the right to know what she was getting into. "Yes," he said finally. "I'm in love with her. For 6 years. And she's being forced to marry this man because he's blackmailing her with information about deaths she could have prevented, but couldn't." "I see." Marina didn't seem surprised. "All right. I just needed to know. Tomorrow morning I'll take everything we have to a prosecutor I know. He's good, serious, and has no patience for criminals who hide behind religious organizations. Thank you, Marina. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we manage to get your girlfriend out of the hands of this psychopath. After he hung up, Liam sat in the office for a long time, looking at all the evidence spread on the table. For the first time since he had begun that investigation, he felt they had a real chance of success, not just to free Hannah, but to ensure that Nathan paid for all the crimes he had committed. But there were still variables he couldn't control. Nathan was obviously suspicious of something. If he decided to accelerate the wedding plans even more, if he decided to take Hannah away from Oakridge, Liam looked at the phone, tempted to call her, to warn her about everything he had discovered, but he knew it would be dangerous. If Nathan intercepted the call, if he discovered she was being helped by someone, no. It was better to wait until the next morning's meeting at the library. A few more hours, and he could tell her everything in person. The next morning, Hannah woke up early and found Nathan already dressed and having coffee in the kitchen, chatting animatedly with her mother about the day's preparations. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he said when she appeared, kissing her cheek with an enthusiasm that didn't reach his eyes. "Your mother was telling me you have some shopping to do today." Hannah looked at her mother, confused. "Shopping? For the wedding, dear. Remember you said you wanted to look at some things in town?" Her mother smiled. "I told Nathan it would be a good opportunity for you to spend time together." Hannah immediately understood. Nathan had orchestrated a way to spend the entire day with her, ensuring she wouldn't have the opportunity to be alone or meet with anyone he didn't approve of. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "It would be great." "Actually," said Nathan, finishing his coffee, "I thought we could start with a visit to the municipal library. I heard it has an interesting section on local history that could give us ideas for the wedding decoration." Hannah's blood froze. The library. Exactly where she was supposed to meet Liam at 9 o'clock. Did Nathan know? Was it coincidence, or had he discovered something? "The library?" she repeated, trying to sound casual. "Why not? We can research local traditions, see if there's anything interesting we could incorporate into the ceremony. It would be a romantic way to start the day, don't you think?" His eyes never left her face as he spoke. He was testing, looking for reactions, trying to confirm some suspicion. "It would, yes," said Hannah, praying that her voice wouldn't betray her. "What time do you want to go?" "How about now? The library opens at 8. We have plenty of time before it gets too crowded." He wanted to arrive early. He wanted to be there before any person she might have arranged to meet. "Perfect," said Hannah, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. An hour later, they were walking through the morning streets of Oakridge toward the library. Nathan kept a possessive arm around her waist, nodding to acquaintances who passed by, perfectly playing the role of the enamored fiancé. But Hannah could feel the tension in his body, the way his eyes continuously scanned the environment, as if expecting to find something or someone specific. When they arrived at the library, it was almost empty. Just the elderly librarian at the information desk, and 1 or 2 students in the back. There was no sign of Liam. "Let's see this local history section," said Nathan, heading directly to the area where Hannah had met Liam 2 days before. They spent the next 40 minutes leafing through books on Virginian matrimonial traditions, Nathan making enthusiastic comments about each detail that could be incorporated into the wedding. To any casual observer, they looked like a happy couple planning their future together. But at 9:05, when the library door opened and Liam Fallon entered, Hannah understood that Nathan had known exactly what he was doing. "Look who's here," said Nathan in a voice loud enough for everyone in the library to hear. "The famous writer Liam Fallon." What an interesting coincidence. The silence that followed Nathan's declaration echoed through the library like distant thunder. Liam stopped at the entrance, his eyes meeting Hannah's for a fraction of a second, before turning to the man he immediately recognized as Nathan Vance. Even though he had never seen him in person, there was something unmistakably predatory in the way he smiled, like a cat that had just cornered 2 mice. "Nathan Vance, I presume," said Liam, keeping his voice calm as he approached. "I've heard a lot about your missionary work. All good things, I hope." Nathan extended his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And you must be the writer who caused such a stir with your lecture here last week. Hannah told me it was very inspiring." The handshake lasted longer than necessary, each man measuring the other's strength, establishing a power dynamic that neither was willing to cede. "I hope I managed to convey something useful," replied Liam, glancing briefly at Hannah, who was as pale as paper. "Literature and spirituality have always been themes that fascinate me. Ah, yes, the eternal questioning about divine mysteries." Nathan released Liam's hand and put his arm around Hannah's shoulders in a gesture that seemed protective, but that Liam recognized as possessive. "Although I believe some questions are better left in the hands of those who truly understand faith and commitment." The provocation was subtle but clear. Nathan was marking territory, making it clear that he considered Liam an intruder in matters that didn't concern him. "Interesting perspective," said Liam, "although I've learned that truth rarely fears questioning. In fact, it usually strengthens with it. Truth, yes. But misinterpretations of truth can be dangerous, especially when they come from people who don't completely know the context." Nathan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Isn't that right, dear?" The question was directed at Hannah, who was clearly struggling to maintain her composure. "Of course," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. Liam felt a cold anger spreading through his chest as he saw how Nathan used Hannah as a piece in the psychological game he was playing. But he knew that any demonstration of emotion would only strengthen Nathan's position. "Well," he said, forcing a casual tone, "I don't want to interrupt you. I just came to pick up a book I had reserved." "What a coincidence," said Nathan. "We're also here researching. For the wedding, actually. Hannah was telling me how she loves coming here to reflect on the important things in life." The way he said this made it clear that he knew exactly why Hannah came to the library, but he still wasn't certain about what she did there or who she met with. "The library is really a special place for reflection," agreed Liam. "Sometimes we find exactly what we need in the most unexpected places, or people," added Nathan, his voice laden with insinuation, "although not always do those people have the best intentions." The tension in the air was becoming palpable. The elderly librarian looked in their direction with growing discomfort, clearly feeling that something was wrong, but not knowing exactly what. "Perhaps we should continue our research," said Hannah suddenly, her voice firmer than it had been until then. "We have a lot to do today." "Of course, my love." Nathan kissed the top of her head, a gesture that seemed tender, but that Liam perceived as another demonstration of possession. "Although I'm curious to know more about Mr. Fallon's work. I heard your latest book is semi-autobiographical?" The question was a trap, and everyone in the library knew it. Nathan was testing how far he could push the situation, looking for reactions that would confirm his suspicions. "All fiction has autobiographical elements," replied Liam carefully. "But it also has a lot of imagination." "Imagination. Yes, that can be dangerous sometimes." Nathan smiled again. "Especially when people begin to confuse fantasy with reality. Or when they begin to believe their own lies," replied Liam, before he could control himself. The comment fell like a bomb in the already tense environment. Nathan stood completely still for a moment, his eyes hardening as he processed the implication of Liam's words. "Excuse me," he said finally, his voice dangerously low. "Could you repeat that?" Liam realized he had gone too far, but he couldn't back down now. "I just observed that sometimes people convince themselves so much of their own narratives that they lose sight of reality. And what narratives would those be?" "Nathan," Hannah intervened quickly, her voice tense, "I think we should go." But Nathan wasn't willing to let it pass. "No, dear, I'm genuinely curious about Mr. Fallon's literary theories." He took a step toward Liam. "What kind of false narratives do you think people usually create?" Liam looked at Hannah, saw the barely disguised terror in her eyes, and made a decision he knew was risky, but necessary. "Narratives about heroism and sacrifice," he said slowly. "Stories about people who pass themselves off as saviors, when in reality they are—" He made a dramatic pause. "Predators." The silence that followed was so dense it seemed physical. Nathan stood completely still, his eyes fixed on Liam's face, processing the implications of the barely disguised accusation. "That's a very serious accusation," he said finally, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. "It's not an accusation," replied Liam. "It's a general observation about types of characters that appear in literature." "Of course it is." Nathan smiled, but there was no humor at all in the expression. "And what evidence do these fictional characters usually leave behind?" The question revealed that Nathan knew exactly what they were talking about, and that he was testing to see how much Liam really knew. Documents, said Liam without hesitation. Witnesses, patterns of behavior that repeat over time. Interesting, Nathan nodded slowly. And these fictional characters, do they usually have allies? People who help them maintain their false narratives? The threat was clear now. Nathan was making it clear that he knew that Hannah had talked to Liam and that anyone who tried to expose him would face consequences. Sometimes, admitted Liam, but those people are usually victims too. Manipulated, blackmailed, forced to participate in something they didn't choose. Ah, Nathan looked significantly at Hannah. Victims who make questionable choices and then try to pass themselves off as innocent. Or victims who were placed in impossible situations by people who abused their trust and faith. The conversation had become a verbal duel, each phrase carefully calculated, each word laden with multiple meanings. Hannah was between the two men, literally and figuratively, watching a battle that would determine her future. "You know," said Nathan, his voice taking on an almost casual tone, "I think you two knew each other before today." The direct accusation made Hannah take an involuntary step backward. "Nathan, you don't need to say anything, dear." He turned to her with a smile that was pure threat. "Your face has already said everything." Liam saw that there was no more pretending. Nathan had confirmed his suspicions, and now it was a matter of minimizing the damage. "You're right," he said. "We met a few years ago." "A few years ago." Nathan repeated the words slowly. "And when exactly did you reunite here in Oak Ridge? Does that matter?" "To me it matters a lot." Nathan took a step toward Hannah, especially considering that my fiancé didn't find it necessary to tell me about this casual reunion. "It wasn't anything important," said Hannah quickly. "We just greeted each other briefly at the library a few days ago." "Just greeted each other." Nathan nodded slowly. "And I'm sure that's exactly what happened." The irony in his voice made it clear he didn't believe a word of what she had said. "Nathan, you're making a tempest in a teapot," tried Hannah. There's nothing what, Hannah? There's nothing between you." "There's nothing I need to know." His voice was getting louder, attracting glances from the few other library users. "Because, you see, I have a very good memory, and I remember you mentioning a writer a few years ago, before the mission, someone who had impressed you." Hannah's heart stopped for a moment. She had completely forgotten that she had mentioned Liam to Nathan years ago in a casual conversation about literature that now became a deadly trap. "Do you remember his name, dear? That writer who impressed you so much?" Hannah opened and closed her mouth, but no word came out. "I remember," continued Nathan, his eyes shining with a cruel satisfaction. "Liam Fallon. The same man who's here in front of us, pretending that you barely know each other." The library was completely silent now. Even the librarian had stopped pretending she wasn't listening to the conversation. "So," said Nathan, his voice taking on a falsely gentle tone, "how about we tell the truth now? About how you really know each other, about when you reunited, and about what exactly you've been talking about during these casual greetings." Liam looked at Hannah, saw the desperation in her eyes, and made a decision. If Nathan already knew about them, there was no more reason to hide. In fact, maybe it was better to force all the cards onto the table. "All right," he said. "You want the truth? I love Hannah, I always have, and she loves me too." The words echoed through the library like a gunshot. Nathan stood completely still for a moment, as if he couldn't process what he had heard. "Continue," he said finally, his voice dangerously controlled. "We met 6 years ago. We fell in love. She left for the mission. I waited. We reunited here last week." Liam took a protective step toward Hannah, and we discovered that nothing had changed. Nothing had changed. Nathan repeated the words as if savoring a poison. "And you, Hannah? Is this your version too?" Hannah looked from Nathan to Liam, her mind racing. She knew that anything she said now would have enormous consequences. But she also knew that she could no longer pretend, could no longer live in the lie that her life had become. "Yes," she said finally, her voice gaining strength. "It's true." What happened next was so quick that none of the three had time to react adequately. Nathan took 2 quick steps toward Hannah, grabbed her arm with enough force to leave marks, and pulled her against him. "Then you're a lying whore," he whispered in her ear, loud enough for Liam to hear. "Exactly as I suspected." "Take your hands off her," said Liam, his voice laden with an anger that had been contained for too long. "Or you'll do what?" Nathan smiled, squeezing Hannah's arm even more. "Hit me right here in front of witnesses? Prove what kind of man you really are." Liam forced himself to stay still, knowing that any act of violence would only strengthen Nathan's position. But seeing Hannah being hurt was testing all the limits of his self-control. "Nathan, you're hurting me," said Hannah, trying to free herself. "Am I hurting you?" His voice took on a tone of false concern. "Sorry, dear. Sometimes I don't know my own strength when I get emotionally disturbed." It was a clear threat. Nathan was showing that he wouldn't hesitate to use physical violence if necessary. "Let her go," repeated Liam, taking a step forward. "I don't think I will." Nathan smiled. "In fact, I think Hannah and I have a lot to talk about. In private. She's not going anywhere with you." "Oh, yes, she is." Nathan looked directly into Liam's eyes. "Because if she doesn't, I'm going to make some calls to people who are very interested in certain irregularities that happened during the mission in Mississippi." The blackmail was being made openly now, without disguises or subterfuges. "And perhaps," continued Nathan, "I'll also call some journalists I know. Tell them an interesting story about an obsessive writer who pursued an innocent missionary, invented slanderous accusations against her fiancé to try to separate them." "Nobody will believe that," said Liam. "No?" Nathan laughed. Nathan, a 43-year-old single man with a history of problems in his academic career, obsessed with a woman 20 years younger? "I think people will believe it, especially when I present the evidence." "What evidence?" "Text messages between you, photos of you together. Maybe even a video or two if I can get access to the right security cameras." Nathan tilted his head. "You'd be surprised by the connections I have in this town." Liam felt a chill in his stomach. Nathan had thought of everything, had prepared for this possibility. He wasn't just a criminal, he was an intelligent and calculating predator. "So here's what's going to happen," continued Nathan. "You're going to leave this library, pack your bags and leave Oak Ridge. Today, and never have contact with Hannah again. And if I refuse, then tomorrow morning the police will receive a complaint about harassment, stalking and defamation. The district attorney will receive a formal complaint about slander and libel, and several newspapers will receive a very interesting story about a disturbed writer who couldn't accept a rejection." The trap was complete. Nathan had transformed the situation so that any move by Liam would be seen as confirmation of the accusations he was prepared to make. "Nathan, stop this," said Hannah, finally finding her voice. "You can't—" "I can do anything, dear, and I will." He turned to her. "Unless you want your father to find out about your romantic adventures during a period when you should have been devoted to religious service." Hannah went pale. "You wouldn't do that." "I would and I will. Unless you come with me now, go back home and never mention this man's name again." It was the perfect checkmate. Nathan had manipulated the situation so that Hannah had no choice but to obey, and Liam had no way to protect her without making everything worse. But that's when Liam remembered something Marina had mentioned the night before, something about timing, about how sometimes the best defense was a well-coordinated attack. "Before we do anything drastic," he said, his voice taking on a calmness that surprised even himself, "perhaps you'd like to know about the calls I made in the last few days?" Nathan frowned. "What calls?" "To the District Attorney of Virginia, to the IRS, to some very competent investigative journalists." Liam smiled for the first time since the conversation had begun. "Calls about misappropriation of resources from religious organizations. About deaths that could have been avoided if certain people hadn't diverted money intended for medical emergencies." The change in Nathan's expression was instant and dramatic. The arrogant confidence disappeared, replaced by something Liam recognized as genuine fear. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Then tell me, Nathan, how do you justify the purchase of a $300,000 apartment and a $120,000 car with a declared income of $42,000 last year?" Nathan released Hannah's arm so abruptly that she staggered. "Or perhaps," continued Liam, taking advantage of the upper hand, "you prefer to explain to Dr. Robert Carter why he was never contacted about the obstetric emergencies in High Ground, despite having left specific instructions about how to proceed in those cases." "You have no proof of anything," said Nathan, but his voice had lost all its previous authority. "No. Then you don't mind if I call Marina Sanders from Time magazine and ask her to publish the information we've collected about suspicious bank movements involving religious organizations. Liam took the phone from his pocket. I'm sure it would be a fascinating article. Don't do that. Why? If you have nothing to hide, what's the problem? Nathan looked around the library, as if searching for an exit that wouldn't be humiliating. But he was cornered, and everyone knew it. What do you want? He asked finally. I want you to get out of Hannah's life. Today. Forever. And in exchange, maybe I'll consider not accelerating the investigation that's already underway. Maybe, Liam smiled. You're not in a position to negotiate terms, Nathan. You're the one who's going to accept what I'm offering. The silence that followed lasted an eternity. Nathan looked from Liam to Hannah, calculating options, measuring risks. Finally, he seemed to reach a conclusion. All right, he said, but this doesn't end here. Actually, said a voice behind them, I think it does. Everyone turned to see Marina Sanders entering the library, accompanied by two men in suits whom Liam didn't recognize. Mr. Nathan Vance, said one of the men, showing identification. I'm Prosecutor Charles Anderson, from the Virginia District Attorney's Office. We'd like to talk to you about some irregularities in organizations under your administration. Nathan turned white as a sheet. We think you might want to cooperate voluntarily, continued the prosecutor. It would be much better for everyone involved. And as Nathan was escorted out of the library, his threats and blackmail crumbling around him, Hannah finally managed to breathe for the first time in months. Freedom had a strange smell, she realized. It smelled of old books, the librarian's cheap perfume, and Liam Fallon's subtle aftershave. It smelled like possibility. The silence that followed Nathan's departure from the library was the kind that precedes great storms. Hannah remained motionless in the same place where he had released her, one hand unconsciously rubbing the arm where she could still feel the pressure of his fingers. Liam and Marina exchanged a significant look. Both knew that despite the momentary victory, what would come next would be equally challenging. Hannah, said Marina softly, approaching her. I'm Marina Sanders, journalist. I worked with Liam to gather the evidence against Nathan. Hannah looked at her as if awakening from a long and confusing dream. Was he arrested? Taken for questioning, corrected Marina. But with the evidence we have, it's very likely he'll be indicted for several crimes. Embezzlement, at the minimum. Possibly negligent homicide for the deaths in High Ground. Negligent homicide. Hannah repeated the words as if testing the taste of a foreign language. Jane and Mary. They'll finally have justice. They will, said Liam, approaching her, and you'll have your life back. Hannah looked at him, and for the first time in years, her eyes didn't carry the weight of guilt and fear, but they didn't carry joy either. There was something more complex there, a mixture of relief, terror, and a kind of emotional vertigo from someone who had just discovered they could fly, but didn't yet know how to use their wings. My life, she repeated. I don't even know what that means anymore. Marina closed the small recorder she had used discreetly during the confrontation with Nathan. Hannah, I know this is a lot to process right now, but I need to warn you about some things that will happen in the coming days. What things? The story will leak. Nathan is a public figure. You're from families known in the region. When the investigation becomes official, the press will want to know details, Marina paused, including details about you two. The reality of the situation began to crystallize in Hannah's mind. It wasn't just a matter of getting rid of Nathan. It was a matter of facing public scrutiny, the opinion of the religious community, questions from the media, and above all, the reaction of her family. My parents, she said suddenly, her eyes widening, they don't know anything about us. They think Nathan is a saint, that our marriage would be a blessing from God. We'll have to tell them, said Liam, but we'll tell them together, in our way, before they hear from other people. And if they don't understand? If they think I'm she hesitated, a fallen woman, like Nathan said? Then they don't know you as well as they think, replied Liam, with a firmness that surprised her. And maybe it's time for them to know who you really are, not who they expected you to be. Marina looked at her watch. I have to return to Richmond, follow the developments of the investigation. But Hannah, if you need anything at all, call me. She handed a card. And remember, you didn't do anything wrong. You were a victim of psychological manipulation by a dangerous man. That's not your shame. After Marina left, Liam and Hannah were alone in the library. The librarian had discreetly retreated to the back, giving them privacy. The building was almost empty now, just some whispers of pages being turned and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. "And now?" asked Hannah. "Now we go home. You'll talk to your parents. Tell them the truth about everything." Liam took her hands in his. "And I'll be there with you if you want. You know they may not accept you. They may not accept us." "I know. But for the first time in 6 years, this is a real possibility, not just an impossible dream. It's worth trying." Hannah studied his face, memorizing every line, every detail, as if seeing him for the first time. "Liam, I need to tell you something." "What?" "During all these years, during the entire mission, all the blackmail, all the fear, the only thing that kept me sane was the memory of that weekend we spent together, the memory of what I felt when you kissed me." She paused, gathering courage. "But now I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that reality won't be as good as the memory. Afraid that what we built in our imagination is stronger than what we can build in real life." Liam smiled, and it was the first truly relaxed smile she had seen on him since they reunited. "Hannah, do you know what the worst moment of the last 6 years was for me?" "What?" "When I finished writing that book about you. Because I realized I had created an idealized version, a paper Hannah who was perfect, who would never disappoint me, never make me question if I was making the right decisions." He gently squeezed her hands. "But in the last few days, getting to know the real woman you've become, I saw that I was wrong. Or that the real Hannah is infinitely more interesting, more complex, stronger than any version I could invent. Even with all the baggage, with all the guilt and confusion, especially with all the baggage, because that's what made you who you are today." They walked back through the streets of Oak Ridge in silence, each lost in thoughts about what the next moments would bring. Hannah's parents' house was only 10 minutes from the library, but it seemed like they took forever to get there. "They're home," said Hannah, noticing the lights on in the living room. "Probably wondering where Nathan went. Do you want me to wait out here?" "No. If we're going to do this, let's do it together." Hannah took a deep breath and opened the door. Her parents were sitting in the living room, her mother sewing something that looked like a trousseau, her father reading a theology book. Both looked up when she entered, followed by Liam. "Hannah, where's Nathan? He left the library hours ago and didn't come back." Her mother frowned when she saw Liam. "And what is Mr. Fallon doing here?" "Mom, Dad, we need to talk." The serious tone of her voice made both parents straighten in their chairs. Hannah's father closed the book, his hand trembling slightly, a symptom of Parkinson's that was becoming harder to disguise. "About what, daughter?" Hannah looked at Liam, who nodded encouragingly, then back to her parents. "Nathan was taken by the district attorney today to be interrogated about financial irregularities and other issues related to his missionary work." The silence that followed was deafening. Hannah's mother dropped the sewing in her lap, her mouth slightly open in shock. Her father blinked several times as if trying to process words that didn't make sense. "That's impossible," he said finally. "Nathan is a man of God. He dedicated his life to missionary service. Dad, there's evidence that he diverted hundreds of thousands of dollars from religious organizations. And worse, there's evidence that people died as a direct consequence of his actions." "What people?" Hannah took a deep breath. The time had come to tell everything. 2 pregnant women in the community of High Ground in Mississippi, Jane Smith and Mary Johnson. They died because Nathan refused to provide emergency medical help, even having resources for it. Hannah's mother put her hand to her chest. "My God. I was there, I saw it all happen. And afterward Nathan made me lie about what had happened. Made me sign false reports." The words now came in a flow she couldn't control. "And when I returned from Mississippi, he used this to blackmail me. Said that if I didn't marry him, he would reveal everything and destroy not only my life, but yours too, Dad." Her father slowly stood up, the book falling to the floor. "Are you saying your engagement to Nathan was based on blackmail?" "I'm saying I never loved Nathan, never wanted to marry him. I accepted because I thought I had no choice." "And the choice you really wanted to make was—" Her mother looked significantly at Liam. "It was to be with Liam, it always was." The words hung in the air of the living room like smoke after a gunshot. Hannah saw her mother make the sign of the cross, saw her father lean heavily on the armchair, as if his legs had weakened. "How long?" asked her father, his voice hoarse. "We met 6 years ago. We fell in love before I left for the mission." Before the mission. Her father repeated the words slowly. When you made your vows of purity. When you promised to dedicate yourself entirely to God's service. Dad, you lied to us, lied to God, left for the mission carrying this sin in your heart. The word sin hit Hannah like a physical slap. It was exactly what she had feared, the reaction she had expected but still hurt to hear. It wasn't sin, said Liam, speaking for the first time since they had entered the house. It was love, pure and true. Hannah's father turned to him, and there was a fury in his eyes that neither had seen before. You have no right to speak about purity in this house. You corrupted my daughter, took advantage of her innocence. I never took advantage of anything. I waited 6 years for her. Waited for what? To destroy the marriage that had been blessed by God? To be with the woman I love when she would be free to choose? Free to choose! Hannah's father laughed bitterly, as if marriage were just a matter of personal choice, as if there weren't greater commitments, spiritual responsibilities. There are, said Hannah, her voice gaining strength. But there's also the right not to be forced to marry a criminal. You don't know if he's a criminal. These are just accusations. Dad, I saw with my own eyes. I lived with him for 2 years. I know what kind of man he is. Her mother, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. Hannah, even if all this about Nathan is true, that doesn't justify what you did. It doesn't justify the lie, the deception. What lie, Mom? Pretending to be one thing when you were another. Letting us believe you were the obedient and pure daughter we raised, when in reality, she hesitated, as if the next words were physically painful, when in reality you were living a double life. I never lived a double life. I never did anything I'm ashamed of. Nothing you're ashamed of? Her father took a step toward her. You met secretly with this man. You allowed him to influence your decisions. Possibly did things an unmarried woman shouldn't do. The insinuation was clear, and Hannah felt her cheeks burn, but this time it wasn't from shame, it was from anger. And what if I did? What if I chose to give my body to the man I love, instead of saving it for a criminal who blackmails me? The slap came so quickly that no one had time to react. Her mother's hand connected with her cheek with a snap that echoed through the living room, leaving a red mark that was immediately covered by Hannah's hand. How dare you, said her mother, tears running down her face. How dare you speak like this in our house in front of your sick father? Enough, said Liam, taking a protective step in front of Hannah. No one is going to hit her while I'm here. You will leave my house, said Hannah's father, his voice trembling with anger. Now, and you will never come back. Dad, no, said Hannah, still with her hand on her face. You have a choice to make, Hannah. This man or your family. This life of sin or the life God planned for you. God didn't plan for me to be blackmailed and forced to marry a criminal. Nathan is not a criminal. And even if he were, that wouldn't change the fact that you broke your vows, betrayed our trust, shamed our name. Hannah looked from her father to her mother, saw the disappointment and anger on the faces of 2 people she had loved her entire life. Part of her wanted to yield, wanted to beg forgiveness, wanted to go back to being the obedient daughter they wanted her to be. But a larger part, a part that had been forged during 6 years of suffering and growth, refused to take even one step back. Then I choose him, she said, her voice clear and firm. I choose love instead of fear. I choose truth instead of the convenient lie. I choose a life where I can be who I really am. The silence that followed was absolute. Her father closed his eyes as if he had just received news of a death. Her mother continued crying, but now they were silent tears of mourning. Then you are no longer our daughter, said her father finally. The words hit Hannah like bullets, each one piercing a different part of her heart, but she didn't falter. If being your daughter means living a lie, then maybe it's better this way. Hannah, said Liam softly, touching her arm, are you sure? She looked at him, saw the concern in his eyes, the way he was ready to back down if she changed her mind. And she realized that this was exactly it. For the first time in her life, she had a real choice. She could go back, she could try to repair the relationship with her parents, she could try to find a middle ground, or she could choose freedom. I am, she said. I'm more certain than I've ever been of anything in my life. Then get your things, said her mother, her voice cold as ice, and leave our house. Hannah went upstairs to her room for the last time. Each object there told a story of her childhood and adolescence, the stuffed animals, the devotional books, the photos of missionary trips with the family. It was as if she were taking a tour of a life that was no longer hers. She packed only the essentials in a small suitcase, some clothes, some books, and in a last-minute decision, a photo of her with her parents taken before her first missionary trip, when everyone still smiled easily. When she came down, she found Liam waiting in the living room. Her parents had retired to their bedroom, not wanting to witness the final departure of their daughter. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To the country house, at least until we decide what to do next." They drove in silence along the dark roads, Hannah looking out the window at the lights of Oakridge receding behind them. Each mile took her further from the life she had known, from the familiar security she had abdicated, from the certainties she had abandoned. But it also took her towards something new, uncertain, frightening, and at the same time full of possibilities. "Do you regret it?" asked Liam when they parked in front of the blue house. "Ask me that in 10 years, she replied, "when we know how the story ends." They entered the house that had been the scene of their first night together as free adults, but this time it was different. There was no secret urgency, no guilt, no fear of being discovered. There were just the two of them, finally alone in the world, finally free to discover who they were when they weren't defined by others' expectations. "I'm scared," confessed Hannah, sitting on the living room sofa. "So am I," admitted Liam, sitting beside her. "What are you afraid of?" "Of not being the man you think I am. Of disappointing you. Of discovering that what we have is less than what we dreamed." He paused. "And of losing you again. And if we discover we're two completely different people than we thought, if we can't build something real together, then at least we'll find out by trying. At least we won't spend the rest of our lives wondering what if." Hannah rested her head on his shoulder, feeling for the first time in years the weight of true freedom. It was heavier than she had imagined, but also lighter. Heavy because now all the choices were hers, and light because she could finally make them. "Liam? Do you really love me? Do you love me for real, or do you love the idea of me?" He moved away enough to be able to look into her eyes. "I love you. You, the woman who chose truth instead of the convenient lie, the woman who spent 6 years serving people who needed help, the woman who carried guilt that wasn't hers because she cared too much to not care." He touched her face gently. "I love you because you're brave enough to give up everything you know for something you don't even know will work out. And I love you," she said, "because you waited, because you believed in us when I didn't even believe in myself, because you see me as I am, not as others want me to be." The kiss that followed was different from all the previous ones. There was no desperation, no rush, no fear of being interrupted. It was a kiss from two people who finally had all the time in the world to discover each other. When they separated, Hannah smiled, the first truly free smile she had given in years. "So," she said, "what do we do now?" "Now," said Liam, "we begin our life." In the days that followed, the story of Nathan Vance dominated the local and then national news. The accusations multiplied as more victims found courage to speak out. Anna Paula Fletcher appeared on a television program telling her experience in Memphis. 2 other women who had worked with him in different projects came forward with similar accounts of manipulation and abuse of power. The investigation revealed a complex network of misappropriation of resources that extended through various organizations in 3 states. The apartment in Atlanta was confiscated, as were the BMW and several other properties that Nathan had acquired with diverted money. But the most shocking revelation came when Dr. Robert Carter decided to break professional silence and publicly tell about the deaths that could have been prevented in high ground. His interview on a national news program was watched by millions of people and generated a wave of indignation that made it impossible to attempt to minimize Nathan's crimes. "Those women died because someone decided their lives were worth less than $5,000, said the doctor, his voice laden with contained emotion. "And the person who made that decision later used the guilt and trauma of those who witnessed these deaths to blackmail and control." The mention of blackmail turned the spotlight on Hannah. Initially, reporters tried to locate her at her parents' house, but discovered she had left and that the family refused to comment on her location. It was Marina Sanders who suggested that Hannah give a controlled interview, telling her version of the story before others created versions for her. "It's not mandatory," explained Marina during a phone conversation, "but if you don't speak, others will speak for you, and usually not in the way you'd like." Hannah considered the suggestion for 3 days, talking long hours with Liam about the pros and cons of exposing herself publicly. On one hand, she wanted privacy, wanted time to heal and discover who she was outside the context of blackmail. On the other hand, she knew her story could help other women who were going through similar situations. "The decision is yours," said Liam, "but whatever it is, I'll support you." In the end, it was an unexpected call that helped her decide. A young missionary of 22 called Marina to get contact with Hannah. She had worked with Nathan on a project in Arkansas the previous year and was facing a similar situation of blackmail and manipulation. "When I saw the news about him on television, I thought, 'It's not just me,'" said the young woman during the phone conversation with Hannah. "For months I thought I was weak, that I was guilty, that I deserved what was happening to me. But if you manage to get out of this situation, you can too," said Hannah. "And you don't have to go through it alone." That's how Hannah decided to speak publicly, not to defend herself or justify herself, but to give voice to other victims who hadn't yet found the courage to speak out. The interview was recorded at the country house, in a controlled and safe environment. Hannah spoke with surprising calmness about the years of manipulation, about the blackmail, about the guilt she had unnecessarily carried. But she also spoke about hope, about the possibility of reconstruction, about how true love could be a liberating force. "There are women watching who are going through similar situations," she said, looking directly at the camera. "I want them to know it's not their fault, that they deserve true love, not manipulation disguised as protection, and that it's never too late to choose freedom." The program aired on a Thursday night and generated national repercussion. Hundreds of women contacted the production, many reporting situations of psychological abuse in religious contexts. The hashtag #NotHannahFreedom became a trending topic, and women's rights organizations began using the case to discuss psychological manipulation and spiritual abuse. But perhaps the most important moment came the following Saturday, when Hannah received a call from her mother. "I watched the program," said her mother, her voice hesitant. And I understood some things I hadn't understood before." She made a long pause. "About what you went through, about why you made the choices you made." Hannah felt tears burning her eyes. "Mom, I'm not saying I agree with everything. I'm not saying I'm not hurt." Her mother took a deep breath. "But I am saying that maybe I was unfair to you, that maybe you were stronger than I thought. And Dad, your father is still processing everything. The disease is getting worse and changes are difficult for him now. But I wanted you to know that I love you. I'll always love you, regardless of the choices you make." It was the first step toward reconciliation. It wouldn't be quick or easy, but it was a beginning. That night, Hannah and Liam sat on the porch of the country house, observing the stars that shone with an intensity that seemed impossible in big cities. "Where do we go now?" she asked. "Wherever you want to go," he replied. "And if I want to stay here, in this house, in this town, build something new right here?" Liam smiled. "Then we stay. And if I want to travel, see places I've always dreamed of seeing, then we travel. And if I don't know what I want, then we discover together." Hannah nestled in his lap, feeling for the first time in years that the future was a blank page she herself could fill. "Liam? Thank you for waiting. Thank you for being worth it." And as the stars silently witnessed, two people who had found in each other the courage to be true began to write the first chapter of a story that would be entirely their own. Her story of freedom, choice, and true love, the kind that doesn't fear the light of day or the scrutiny of the world, because it's built on the solid foundation of truth and mutual acceptance. A story that was just beginning. 8 months later, autumn came early to Virginia, painting the mountains around Oak Ridge with golden tones that seemed to bless everything they touched. Hannah was on the porch of the country house, which was now officially hers after finalizing the transfer of her aunt's inheritance, watering the plants she had cultivated during the last few months. They were simple flowers, but ones she had personally chosen. Sunflowers that followed the sun, lavender that perfumed the mornings, and white roses that bloomed despite the thorns. The house had been completely transformed since that first night of freedom. What before was a temporary refuge had become a true home. Liam had brought his books, his manuscripts, his old typewriter that he insisted on using for first drafts. Hannah had created a small studio where she painted, a passion she had discovered during the months of rebuilding herself. The walls now displayed her canvases, landscapes of the valley, portraits of local residents who had become friends, still lifes that captured the simple beauty of everyday life. "The last copies arrived today," said Liam, appearing on the porch with a box in his hands. It was his new book, Letters to the Woman Who Chose to Be Free, a collection of reflections on love, freedom, and reconstruction that he had written during the first months after Nathan's fall. "And how do you feel?" asked Hannah, drying her hands on her apron before taking one of the copies. "Like someone who finally wrote the right story," he replied, watching her leaf through the pages. "It's strange, you know. This time I didn't write about you. I wrote with you, as if you were by my side during every word." "Because I was," she said, smiling. "During every dawn when you stayed awake, struggling with the sentences. During every moment when you doubted if it was worth telling these stories." The book had been an unexpected success. Not so much for the sales, although it was doing well, but for the impact it had on readers. Liam received letters weekly from people who had found courage to leave abusive relationships, to question authorities who took advantage of others' faith, to choose their own freedom even when it meant losing others' approval. "Marina called this morning," he said, sitting in the chair beside her. "Nathan was convicted. 7 years in prison plus the obligation to reimburse all the defrauded organizations." Hannah nodded, but there was no satisfaction on her face, just a kind of tired relief. "And the other women?" "All received compensation. That young woman from Arkansas, Patricia, managed to graduate in psychology and is setting up a support center for victims of spiritual abuse." Liam took her hand in his. "Your testimony helped more people than you imagine. Sometimes I still think of them, Jane and Mary. If they could see what happened afterward, they would see that their deaths weren't in vain. That they brought justice not just for them, but for many others." It was a pain that Hannah had learned to carry differently, no longer as a crushing weight of guilt, but as a gentle responsibility to honor the memory of the two women by living a full and free life, the kind of life they should have had the chance to live. The sound of a car coming up the dirt road interrupted her thoughts. It was a white Toyota, the same one Hannah had driven months ago, but that now officially belonged to her after her parents finally accepted that she wouldn't return home. "Were we expecting someone?" asked Liam. "No," said Hannah, but there was something familiar about the car that made her heart slightly accelerate. The door opened and her mother got out, followed more slowly by her father. Hannah rose from the chair so quickly she almost knocked over the watering can. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" It was the first time she had seen them in person since the night she had left home. There had been some phone conversations in the last months, careful and hesitant like two strangers trying to learn to trust each other again. But seeing them there, standing in the yard of the house where she had built a new life, was surreal. "We came to talk to you," said her mother, her voice softer than Hannah remembered. "If you don't mind, of course." "Of course we don't mind," said Liam, standing up too. "Please come in." They moved to the living room where Hannah served coffee and homemade cookies. She had learned to make following recipes she had found in an old book of her aunt's. It was a simple domestic ritual, but one that seemed to carry the weight of 8 months of separation and gradual reconciliation. "The house is beautiful," said her mother, looking around. "Have you always had good taste in decoration?" "Thank you." Her father had remained quiet, his hands trembling slightly more than Hannah remembered. The Parkinson's was progressing, and she felt a pang of guilt for not having been present during this difficult period. "How are you feeling, Dad?" she asked. "Some days are better than others," he replied, his voice hoarser than before. "But that's not what we came to talk about." "Then what did you come to talk about?" Her parents exchanged a look, and Hannah realized they had rehearsed this conversation, that they had planned every word they would say. "We came to apologize," said her mother finally. The words hung in the room like notes from a song no one expected to hear. Hannah felt tears burning her eyes, but forced herself to maintain composure. "Mom." "No, let me finish." Her mother took a deep breath. "These last months have been difficult. Not just because of your absence, but because they forced us to rethink many things we always took for granted." "What things?" "About faith, about family, about what it means to truly love someone." She looked at Liam. "I spent months convinced that you had corrupted our daughter, that you had taken advantage of her innocence. And now I see a man who loved our daughter enough to wait 6 years for her, who helped her find courage to escape from a terrible situation, who is by her side as she rebuilds her life." Her mother paused. "That's not the behavior of someone who wants to take advantage of a person. It's the behavior of someone who truly loves." Liam felt his throat tighten. "Thank you for saying that." "And you," said her father, looking at Hannah, "you were braver than I ever was. You faced situations that would have broken older and more experienced people. And when you finally had the chance to choose your own life, you chose truth, even knowing the price you would pay." "Dad!" "I'm ashamed of how we reacted that night. You needed support, understanding, and we offered judgment and rejection." Tears freely ran down the face of the man who had been a pillar of strength throughout Hannah's life. "You didn't deserve that." "None of us knew how to handle the situation," said Hannah softly. "We were all scared. But we were your parents. It was our job to protect you, not condemn you. And it's our job now to make peace with the mistakes we made," added her mother. "If you'll let us." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was a silence full of possibilities, of bridges being rebuilt, of love that had been tested but not broken. "Of course we'll let you," said Hannah, standing up to embrace her parents. "You're my family. You always have been. You always will be." The embrace that followed was long and cathartic, full of tears and whispered words of forgiveness. Liam observed from his chair, respecting the moment of family reconciliation, but feeling included in a way he had never experienced before. "And there's something we want to ask you," said her mother, when they finally separated. "What?" "We want you to get married in our church, with our blessing." The proposal was so unexpected that Hannah was speechless for a moment. "Mom, you don't have to do this just because—" "We're not doing it out of obligation," interrupted her father. "We're doing it because we see how you look at each other, how you care for each other, how you've built something beautiful and true together. That's the kind of love that should be celebrated, not hidden." Hannah looked at Liam, who was clearly as surprised as she was. "We haven't yet talked about marriage," she said. "Then maybe it's time to talk," said Liam with a smile that made her heart race. "You don't have to decide now," said her mother. "We just want you to know that when you feel ready, you'll have our full support." Her mother told them about how the community had reacted to Nathan's scandal, about how some people had initially criticized Hannah, but how the majority had ended up supporting her courage in exposing the truth. "There are people at the church who want to meet you," said her father to Liam. "They want to thank you for helping our daughter." "I just loved her," replied Liam. "She did all the heavy lifting." "That's not true," said Hannah. "You gave me something I never had before." "What?" "The feeling that I was enough, that I didn't need to change to deserve to be loved." It was a revelation that touched everyone present. Throughout her life, Hannah had felt that she needed to conform to others' expectations to be accepted. With Liam, for the first time, she had discovered what it meant to be loved exactly as she was. When her parents left late in the afternoon, promising to return the following week for dinner, Hannah and Liam remained on the porch watching the car descend the dirt road until it disappeared. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like a part of me that was fractured has finally healed," she replied. "And you? How do you feel about the possibility of getting married in the church with all the traditional ceremony?" Liam laughed. "Honestly? Terrified? Why?" "Because for 6 years I imagined what it would be like if we could officially be together. I dreamed about it so many times that I'm afraid reality can't compete with the fantasy." Hannah turned to face him completely. "And if I told you that reality is already better than anything I imagined, I'd say you're being kind to me. I'd say you're not listening to me properly." She took his hands in hers. "Liam, in the last 8 months I've discovered myself in ways I never thought possible. I learned that I can be strong without being hard, that I can be vulnerable without being weak, that I can love without losing myself in the process. And none of that would have been possible if you hadn't loved me first. If you hadn't shown me that there existed a version of myself worth fighting to preserve." Liam felt his throat tighten again. "Hannah, so yes, I want to marry you. I want the ceremony, the family, the whole community witnessing. I want everyone to know that we chose each other not out of desperation or need, but out of true love. Even knowing it won't be perfect, that we'll have problems, arguments, difficult moments. Especially knowing that, because I know we'll face everything together." The proposal came 2 weeks later, in a way that was completely typical of Liam. It wasn't a grand public gesture or an elaborate surprise. It was on a Saturday morning, while they were working together in the garden, hands dirty with soil, sweat on their foreheads, completely absorbed in the simple task of planting tulip bulbs that would bloom in the spring. "Hannah," he said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the hole he was digging. "What?" "Marry me." She looked at him, at his dirty hands, at his disheveled hair, at the eyes that shone with a mixture of nervousness and certainty. "Is that how you're going to propose to me? No ring, no kneeling, nothing? That's how I want to ask you. In the middle of our real life, doing real things, being exactly who we are." Hannah put down the shovel and knelt in the wet soil in front of him. "Then that's how I'm going to answer. Yes, I want to marry you. Here, like this, in this imperfect and real way." They kissed right there in the middle of the garden, with dirty hands and hearts full of a happiness that seemed impossible to contain. It was a moment that no photographer could capture, that no ceremony could reproduce. It was just theirs, pure and simple and true. The wedding was set for a Saturday in May, when spring was at its height, and the mountains around Oakridge seemed to have been painted by an artist, in love with vivid colors. The church was too small to accommodate all the guests, not just families and friends, but also people from various towns who had been touched by Hannah and Liam's story. Marina came from New York with a small team of journalists, not to exploit the story, but to document a happy ending that rarely made it to the news. Dr. Robert Carter made the trip from Jackson, saying he wouldn't miss the most important wedding of the century for anything. Anna Paula brought her 2 daughters, who threw rose petals in the bride's path. But perhaps the most significant presence was that of Patricia, the young missionary from Arkansas, who had found courage to escape from her own situation of abuse after hearing Hannah's testimony. She was radiant, graduated in psychology, engaged to a kind young man who loved her exactly as she was, and ready to start the support center that would become a national reference. "You saved my life," she said to Hannah during the greetings before the ceremony. "You saved your own life," replied Hannah. "I just showed that it was possible." The ceremony itself was simple and beautiful. Hannah's father, who had insisted on performing the wedding despite the growing difficulties with Parkinson's, spoke about true love as a reflection of divine love, not possessive, not controlling, but liberating and strengthening. When it came time for the vows, Liam and Hannah had written their own. "Hannah," said Liam, his voice clear and firm, "I promise to love you not despite your imperfections, but including them. I promise to support your choices, even when I don't completely understand them. I promise to be your partner in adventures and your refuge in difficult moments. And I promise never to forget that you chose to be here with me when you could choose anything else in the world." "Liam," replied Hannah, tears freely running down her face, "I promise to love you with the same courage you taught me to have. I promise to be true to myself so I can be true to you. I promise to build our life together like a work of art, with patience, dedication, and a lot of color. And I promise never to take for granted the miracle of having found someone who loves me exactly as I am." The kiss that sealed the marriage was witnessed by 300 people, but for Hannah and Liam, it was as if they were alone in the universe. It was a kiss that carried 6 years of waiting, 8 months of reconstruction, and a promise of decades of companionship ahead. The party lasted until the early hours of the morning, with music, dancing, and stories that would remain in the memory of all present. But the most touching moment came when Hannah's father asked for silence, and with difficulty but with determination, stood up to make a toast. "A year ago," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I lost a daughter because of fear and pride. Today I not only regained a daughter, but gained a son who taught me that true love isn't about control. It's about freeing people to be who they really are." He raised his glass. "To Hannah and Liam, who taught us that sometimes the greatest demonstration of faith is having the courage to question, and that true love is worth any fight." 6 months later, on a golden November morning, Hannah was sitting on the porch of the country house, which was now officially the house of both, reading a letter that had arrived by mail. It was from a woman in Ohio who had escaped from a forced marriage after reading Liam's book and watching Hannah's interview. "Another one?" asked Liam, appearing with 2 cups of coffee. "The 23rd this month," said Hannah, carefully folding the letter. Sometimes I wonder if we knew what we were getting into when we decided to be public about our story. Do you regret it? Never. She looked at him, at the man who had become not just her husband, but her best friend, her partner in everything. Just sometimes I'm impressed by how many people were waiting for someone to say it was possible to choose freedom. Maybe they weren't waiting for someone to say it. Maybe they were waiting for someone to do it. It was a profound observation, typical of the way Liam saw the world. Hannah had learned in the months of marriage that he had a unique ability to find meaning in the simplest details of life. Liam? Are you happy? Really happy? He put the coffee cup on the table and took her hands in his, a gesture that had become automatic between them. Do you know the moment I knew I would be happy forever? He asked. When? It wasn't when you said yes to the marriage. It wasn't at the ceremony or on the honeymoon or in any of the big moments. He smiled. It was on a Tuesday morning, 3 months ago, when I woke up before you and just watched you sleep. That sounds a bit creepy. Let me finish. I was watching you sleep and I realized you were smiling in your sleep. And I thought, this is a woman who has found peace. And then I thought, and I had the privilege of being part of that journey to peace. Hannah felt tears burning her eyes. I still dream about them sometimes, you know, about Jane and Mary. And how are those dreams? Different now. Before they accused me, blamed me. Now they smile. As if they were saying it's all right, that their deaths brought something good to the world. Maybe they did bring something good. Do you believe that? That everything that happened had a purpose? Liam considered the question for a long moment. I believe that you two took something terrible that happened and transformed it into something beautiful. I don't know if there was a purpose from the beginning, but I know that you created one. It was an answer that satisfied her more than any religious platitude could do. Hannah had learned to find meaning not in ready-made answers, but in the way difficult questions made her grow. And now, she asked, what do we do with this beautiful life we've built? Now we live it. Every day in the best way we know how. We plant more flowers, write more stories, help more people find courage. He kissed her forehead tenderly. And we love each other, with the gratitude of those who know that what we have is rare and precious. The sound of a car coming up the road interrupted the moment. It was the mailman, who now came twice a week because of the volume of correspondence they received. But today he brought something different, a large package addressed to both. What is it? Asked Hannah, as Liam opened the package. I don't know. We weren't expecting anything. Inside was a framed painting and a letter. The painting was of 2 young women in simple dresses, smiling under an infinite blue sky. The artistic quality was amateur, but there was a tenderness in the execution that immediately touched both. The letter was from a young artist from Jackson. Dear Hannah and Liam, my name is Jane Smith Johnson. I am the granddaughter of Jane Smith, one of the women who died in High Ground. My family only found out the truth about what happened to her after your story became public. For years I grew up hearing that my grandmother died because God wanted to call her home. Now I know she died because someone decided her life wasn't worth $5,000. This truth hurt a lot at first, but then I began to think about how your courage honored her memory, how your love transformed her death into something that saved other lives. And I decided I wanted to be part of that too. This painting is of my grandmother and Mary Johnson, as I imagine they would be today if they had survived. Free, happy, proud of the women they helped save. Thank you for not letting them be forgotten. With love, Jane. Hannah finished reading the letter with tears running down her face. She looked at the painting, at the 2 women painted with so much love and hope, and felt something complete itself inside her. We'll hang it in the living room, she said finally, so they'll always remember their home. I think they already know, said Liam softly. That night, lying in the bed they had shared for almost a year, Hannah and Liam talked about plans for the future. They had decided to write a book together. He would be responsible for the narrative, she for the illustrations. It would be the story of 2 people who learned that true love isn't something you find, but something you choose to build, day after day, choice after choice. How will we end the story? Asked Hannah, her head nestled on his chest. With the truth, replied Liam, that there's no happily ever after. There's just the daily decision to love, to choose each other, to build something beautiful together. That's not very romantic for a love story. Of course it is. Fate's the deepest kind of romance possible, one that doesn't depend on blind passion or fate, but on conscious choice and true commitment. Hannah smiled in the dark. After all these months, she was still surprised by the way he could transform complex ideas into simple and true words. Liam? I love you. Not because you saved me, or because you waited for me, or because you're a good man. I love you because you made me discover who I really was, underneath all the expectations and fears. And I love you, he replied, kissing the top of her head, because you had the courage to become that person, even knowing the price you would pay. And there, in that blue house in the Virginia mountains, two people who had learned that true love isn't about perfection, but about acceptance, fell asleep, knowing that each day they woke up together would be a new opportunity to choose each other. Outside, the valley slept peacefully under a starry sky that seemed to bless everything it touched. In the windows of the house, two paintings stood out, one that Hannah had made of the view of the valley, and another showing two young women smiling under an infinite sky, reminding everyone that true love, the kind that liberates instead of imprisoning, that strengthens instead of diminishing, is always worth the fight. And so, with the soft sound of the breathing of two people who had finally found their place in the world, our story comes to an end. Not with a perfect ending, but with a perfect beginning. The beginning of a life built on the solid foundation of truth, choice, and love that doesn't fear the light of day. Because some stories don't end. They just transform into the first chapter of something even more